there. And in this unit, we will look at the how the Western powers starting from with Russia, Great Britain, and US, because they wanted to try to establish diplomatic relation with Tokugawa Japan, and these attempts were initially resisted, but soon the Tokugawa regime relented and negotiated trade and diplomatic relations with the US, Great Britain, and other European powers. They wanted to connect with Japan also. The coming of the black ships, Commodore Matthew Perry. In 1853, Commodore Matthew Perry from US appeared with a flotilla. His ships were called black ships because coal tar was used to seal the cracks between the planks of the ship. And the following year, a treaty of amity and friendship was signed. This marked the culmination of a process which had begun much earlier. The Russians and British had been pressing on the coast of Japan since 17th century. The Russians had established themselves on the Sea of Okhotsk, and from there they made exploratory trips. One back to back, in 1738, Martin Spenberg, a Russian explorer, had discovered a route to Japan. Subsequently, serious efforts were made to open Japan and establish the relations from Japan. In 1792, Lieutenant Adam Laxman arrived in Izo. Izo means modern Hokkaido, that is also an island near Japan, but was denied entry and failed to win any concessions to open trade. The next Russian envoy went to Nagasaki, which was the only port where foreigners were allowed. But the Japanese were not interested in foreign trade. In 1806, 1807, Russians raided Japan ports in Sakhalin and Kuril Islands. This led to tensions and confrontations between the two countries. And the next is the whaling and opening of Japan. Now, whaling is a big business movement at that time for Japan. In 19th century, whaling was the fifth largest industry in the US, and whaling ships sailing across the Pacific needed safe ports for refueling and supplies, because that is also very important for the trade which they were doing by sea. Refuel the ship is a very big need for that time in Pacific Ocean. This, as well as the attraction of China market, led the US to play an increasingly important role in opening Japanese ports to foreign trade, because if they will enhance their concentration towards Japanese ports and to enhance the trade with the other countries of Japan, then that is very important step for Japan. Writer Herman Melville depicts this world of the whalers in the novel Moby Dick, and writes what it writes: if Japan, the double bolted land, is ever opened, it will be because of the whale ships. Next is the Bakufu and Daimyo reactions to Western demands. In 1806, a decree ordered local officials to keep foreigners out. And in 1825, officials were told to destroy any ships which came near the coast. This was not just based on xenophobic anti-foreignism. It was a reaction to a complex problem. On the one hand, the Japanese clearly lacked the military capability to keep the Western nations out, but on the other hand, most groups were adamant that there should be no concessions to these demands. And next is the coming of Perry. Why did Matthew Perry came to Japan? In July 1853, Commodore Matthew Perry came to Japan via China. And Okinawa in a squadron of two stream frigates and two sloops entered Edo Bay in July 1853. What was the demand of Matthew Perry? To demand the opening of ports and ensure a supply of coal. Perry presented a letter from the President of USA. His imperious behavior, backed by superior military power, underlined the inability of Tokugawa Bakufu to deal effectively with the power of Western nations. In the spring of 1854, the Bakufu signed a treaty of amity and commerce and opened two ports that were Shimoda and Hakodate. They were they were two ports. They have opened that two ports for that treaty with the Western nations, where U.S. ships could refuel, provision their ships, and there was a most favored nation clause, which would automatically extend any benefits granted to any other country. The United States was also allowed to post a consular agent at Shimoda. The treaty was a beginning as the ports opened were small and remote, but it was a major departure from the Bakufu's earlier policy of isolation. In October, the Bakufu concluded a similar treaty with the British and then with Russia, in which Nagasaki was also opened. In 1855, the Dutch also signed a treaty with the Japanese. Next, the steps to the Meiji Restoration. What were the steps? The step number one, 1853 to 1858, and during this period, the Bakufu tried to minimize foreign demands to open ports. Abe Masahiro, the Bakufu official, argued that rejecting Paris' demand for a treaty would invite the danger of war, while acceptance would give them a breathing space during which they could strengthen themselves. As a Bakufu official wrote, what did he wrote? Arguing that Yokohama should be opened to keep foreigners away. Yokohama should be opened to keep foreigners away from imperial palace, the shrine territories, the private fiefs, so that it could preserve the natural order by making only the minimum concessions. Next, the Bakufu signed the treaties in 1858, which allowed trade at Yokohama and permit foreign resistance in Edo from the following year in 1859. Japan had to reconsider her policy of isolation because military power also always springs from national wealth, and the means of enriching the country are principally to be found in trade and commerce. Number two, next is 1860 to 1864. During 1860 and in 1863, there was a successful attempt to restore the empire. In this fast paced political scenario, there were other attempts to broaden the base of political participation. The great daimyo, who had been excluded from power and kept out of decision making councils, sought to use the beleaguered Bakufu's weakness to increase their role and increase their strength. In 1864, the Bakufu agreed to give indemnities for foreigners but did not allow them to reside in Kyoto area. In 1865, the court approved the treaties but refused to allow foreigners in Hyogo. And next is number three, 1865 to 1868. That period marks the triumph of an open country policy and acceptance of new order. The Bakufu sent official embassies to London and Paris in 1867, and even before that, an official Ikeda Nagasaki wrote after a tour of Europe that to lay the foundation of national independence, and it is fundamental that national unity will be attained within Japan. Next is British and French rivalry in Japan. Britishers also wanted to enter in Japan for trade purposes, and French also wanted to enter in Japan for trade purpose. But Japan did not want for any foreign invasion towards Japan, any foreign trade purpose towards Japan. Up to now, it had been a question of Japan and foreigners, but soon Anglo French rivalry began to intervene in Japanese affairs, with the French gravitating towards the Bakufu and British supporting Satsuma and Chosu. The French connection began in 1864 when a Bakufu official was sent to Paris and Leon Roches came to Japan. Roches gradually began to pursue an independent French policy rather than work is concerned with the other Western powers. The British too were gradually shifting towards supporting the Han. In 1866, Ernest Satow, an official of British legation, had translated into Japanese a series of articles that he wrote urging foreigners not to treat Japan as one single entity but rather as a collection of daimyo ruled Han. The opening of Japan had not meant that Christianity would be allowed, and the ban on religion continued. Religion, Christianity. When Christians were there, they wanted to enhance their religion to Japan. But Japanese did not want this. And Japanese wanted that Christian missionaries and Christianity will not be there in Japan, which should not be there in Japan. But missionaries began to arrive. And in spite of ban, they took steps to spread their religion in Japan. Economic problems and anti-foreign sentiments. By 1867, the foreign powers had become deeply involved in internal rivalries, and this involvement created a dangerous situation for Japan, in which it could easily have been colonized. The economic effect of treaties and the entry of foreign trade had been disruptive. Cheap manufactured goods like cotton fabric, and they were running traditional domestic industry. In particular, the favorable gold and silver exchange in Japan was used by foreign traders to devastating effect. In Japan, the gold and silver exchange was 6:1, whereas the rest of world it was 15:1. Silver exchange. Traders brought in silver and brought the cheaper gold and then exported this gold to make a handsome profit. The massive export of species and influx of silver disrupted the Japanese economy and caused undue hardship to the people. The large number of peasant uprisings and urban disturbances is ample reflection of strains the economy and society were undergoing. Next is Meiji Restoration. The return of power from Bakufu to emperor in 1868 marked the Meiji Restoration. This was brought about by a coalition of daimyos led by Satsuma and Choshu, two of major outside lords. The ediction of Tokugawa Yoshinobu was announced by an imperial edict on January 1868. This marked the formal end of long rule of Tokugawa. In April, the court announced the Charter Oath, which laid down the policies the new government would follow, and in October 1868, the emperor selected the Chinese characters, meaning enlightened rule or Meiji rule, by which his reign 1868 to 1912 would be known. Next is the significance of 1868. What had been done over there? The political change of 1868 was one step, albeit a major step in a process. The new government did not start with a clear agenda, but through debates and experiments, they created a modern constitutional monarchy by 1890. There were various movements that reflected a search for an alternative form of government. One major model available was to build the daimyo ruled Han. Many Han had begun reforms to strengthen their finances, restructure their administration, and even build an army trained in modern methods. The second method, the second model was to look back at the Retsuryo system of imperial rule in the Heian period. This was supported by the growing in strength intellectual movements, placing the emperor at the center of Japan culture. The third was the models provided by Western countries. Japanese had been studying these countries and Bakufu had begun to send embassies to study the West. Next is scholarly approaches to Meiji Restoration. How scholars was saying related to Meiji Restoration. Whether the events of 1868 mark the restoration of a revolution are questions which scholars are still debating. Tetsuya Nazita, for instance, writes that the Japanese emperor did not have a specific structure of power to restore, and whatever grandiose images came to be associated with him. After the restoration were the results of ideological construction of modern state and not the legacy of recent history. Some Japanese views, what the Japanese views were saying, a well-known Meiji intellectual, Tokutomi Soho, argued that it was not Meiji leaders, but the circumstances which helped to create a modern Japan. He saw feudal Japan as already weakening with the emergence of rural leaders, whose strength was based on a productive and rich country, but who were denied political power. A very influential analysis of Meiji Restoration was made by Marxists in 1920s, when internal repression and an aggressive foreign policy led them to re-examine the nature of modern Japanese state. A vast range of detailed and scholarly works were produced and the views were divided into two broad groups. The Labor Farmer Group, Roneha, saw the restoration as fundamentally a bourgeois revolution which ended feudalism and laid the basis for capitalist development. The other group, which took its name from the series or lectures they produced. This group argued that the Meiji Restoration was not a successful capitalist revolution, but one which ushered in an absolutist rule. This was based on emperor system, and power of this system rested on feudal relations which had continued in the countryside. Scholarship after World War II. After World War II, how Japan was giving scholarship to the students of Japan. In post World War II period in Japan, the debate has continued. E.H. Norman, in his path-breaking work, but forward an interpretation which has influenced many scholars. Norman saw the restoration as the work of a coalition of lower samurai and merchants. Albert Craig. Albert Craig had argued that lower samurai is analytically meaningless as upper samurai were a very small percentage and any movement would include a large number of lower samurai. Number one, the first is that the Meiji Ishin arose as a protective reaction against Western imperialist threat. Secondly, the real conflict lay between the forces of feudalism and emerging capitalist forces and Meiji state, which emerged was a mix of these two elements. Thirdly, the nature and role of lower samurai is debated. Conrad Totman has argued that the prime cause of Meiji restoration was the internal collapse of Tokugawa Bakufu. Next is from saving the people to mobilizing them to serve the state. The Tokugawa concerns were with ordering society and saving the people, but with the Meiji, the prime interest has become the rich country, strong army. Fukoku Kyohei. That is the slogan for Japanese people at that time, for saving the people and for ordering society and saving the people. What is that? Fukoku Kyohei. That means rich country, strong army. The change from saving to mobilizing the people occurred with Meiji Ishin. This process occurred over a period of time and was preceded by debates and confrontation. The French or Russian revolutions saw what they saw. The Meiji Restoration was neither bourgeois nor a peasant revolution, although both peasant and merchant were found among the individuals who led the attack on shogunate. In conclusion, we can say it needs to be emphasized that while the Meiji Restoration inaugurated a new era for Japanese, the reason for Japan's successful transformation lie not merely in breathing space, which it enjoyed. The Western imperialist powers were certainly more interested in Great China market and did not see any great potential in Japan. This gave Japan the chance to carry out a series of reforms, but that she was able to conceive and execute these reforms That she was able to use the chance that she had was more due to internal strength and indigenous institutions. Next, we are going to cover Unit 4. The main things of Unit 3 we have covered that were, first of all, we have done about in Unit 3 the Meiji Restoration and the creation of modern Japan, how Japan wanted to create themselves. Okay, next we have covered coming of black ships, how Matthew Perry came from USA in July to Japan. And what was his demand? He wanted to make refuel their ships in Pacific Ocean, and Pacific Ocean was connected to Japan also. That's why they wanted to sign a treaty from with Japan. Whaling is a big business or trade at that time in opening of Japan. Next, Bakufu, daimyo reactions to Western demands. How Western countries demanded from Japan and how they connect themselves, just like daimyo. What was the reactions of daimyo class and the Bakufu class over in Japan? They wanted to enhance the trade or not. The coming of Perry. I told you earlier that US ship wanted to refuel and they wanted to provision their ships. That's why they wanted to sign a treaty with Japan. And Russia, France was also connected with these treaties. Meiji restoration steps, how they have taken their steps to overcome their danger, to overcome their demands, to overcome their failure. They started Meiji restoration, how much steps they were taking. We have discussed steps year wise, just like first step in 1853 to 1858, next step 1860 to 1864, what they have done in these years time period. Next is 1865 to 1868, how much works they have done in this. Next, we have done British and French rivalry in Japan. Next, we have done economic problems and anti-foreign sentiments, because so many powers wanted to restore their power in Japan, and how they overcame from these things, and how they solved their economic problems, how they enhanced their trade. Next, how they restore uh, Meiji government over there. The significance of 1868, that is a very important year in the time period of history. 1868 year, they have done a lot of, just like model wise, they have worked in Japan, just like one model, second model, third model, fourth model. They have developed their economy at that time in 1868. Scholarly approaches to the Meiji Restoration, how much scholars came to Japan and how they wrote about Japan economy, Japan society. Next, some Japanese views. Some scholars and some viewers had given their views towards Japanese, how Japan make themselves modern. Scholarship after World War II, how the Japan government wanted to give scholarship to the students of Japan just to enhance the education of Japan. And the Japanese government had given scholarship to the student of Japan so that education will be enhanced. From saving the people to mobilizing them to serve the state. Rich country, strong army. That is a very important slogan at that time for Japan history. Rich country, strong army, Fukoku Kyohei. Okay, and that is the change from saving to mobilizing the people that occurred with Meiji Restoration. And lastly, we have discussed about the conclusion. Next, in Unit 4, we will study about the Meiji political order. In Unit 3, economical order, trade purposes, we have discussed, and in Unit 4, Meiji political order, we will discuss. In this unit, the nature, the characteristics, the process of political structure that was created will be examined. In this unit, we are concerned with the principles by which Meiji oligarchy means the main person of the particular group, Meiji oligarchy, wealthier people, as well as those in opposition were motivated. Meiji oligarchy and as well as oppositions were motivated. This unit also discusses the people's right to movement, the demand for a democratic system, how they made their constitution in Japan, and the nature of Meiji state. These rapid changes were carried out to show the Western powers, and Japan was a mature and civilized nation that should be treated equally. Japan soon emerged as a power in the world with a developed economy and a powerful military capability. Next is establishment of an imperial government. How they established imperial government in Japan. As early as January 3, 1869, the old offices were established and a new council formed with an imperial prince at the helm. These changes were not final. Various changes followed as the power of the new rulers expanded and their control increased. The new rulers crossed certain hurdles by initiating some major steps. Because if one new person will enter in any organization, in any country, in any political system, then he or she will have to face so many problems in front of him. Just to how to face the problems they were facing at that time when he or she was absent, he or she was not there in system, then how they were facing and what steps they were taking before that person. The new ruler crossed certain hurdles by initiating some major steps. No to privileges. First, they have done no to privileges. Privileges means the special rights which were given to the particular person, to the particular group, to the particular society. Privileges. The first major hurdle in consolidating the new basis of power was to abolish the rights and privileges enjoyed by the daimyo and the samurai. They were the two groups, daimyo group and samurai group. The daimyo enjoyed a certain degree of autonomy. Autonomy means self-rule. The daimyo enjoyed self-rule a certain degree. Abolishing the privileges of the daimyo was perceived as the dismantling of an outmoded feudal structure and confrontation of power of emperor. Means they wanted to make less powerful to feudal system, and they wanted to give power to emperor. The fear of opposition held the leaders back, but an initial step was taken when a decree requiring the daimyo to separate public and private business and select officials on the basis of talent, not birth, was issued. Subsequently, the leading Han, Satsuma, Choshu, Tosa, Heizen, leading Han offered to surrender their privileges and asked that the court issue such orders as it may deem necessary, disposing of the lands of the great domains and deciding changes in them, so that state affairs, both great and small, may be in the hands of single authority. No to privileges. They did not want to give privilege to daimyo and to samurai. No any special rights will be given to such societies. A national army. First step, no to privileges. Second step, a national army. Second major step in the building of the nation state was the creation of a national army. Traditionally, the privilege of bearing arms had been monopolized by the samurai. Monopolized by the samurai. Ever since Hideyoshi carried out a sword hunt in the 16th century, which disarmed the peasantry and ushered in the period of relative peace. The proposals to reform the military force were supported by Yamagata Aritomo. Proposal to reform the military force were supported by Yamagata Aritomo in 1838 to 1922. That is the time period of Yamagata Aritomo. That is one of the leading Meiji leaders. He saw the importance of Western training, organizational methods, and he also saw that the trained recruits would return to their villages and become a reserve force. He wanted to make a force which was trained and which was recruited to the villages also, to the urban areas also. On January 10, 1873, a conscription law was promulgated requiring adults of 20 years to put in 3 years of active military service and 4 years of reserve service. 3 years of active military service and 4 years of reserve service for adults more than 20 of 20 years. The country was divided into 6 army districts with a combined strength of 31,000 men. 31,000 men. The conscription law introduced uniformity, centralization to what had been a piecemeal approach. Since 1853, because of the multiplicity of political power centers, a number of approaches had been tried. So many approaches had been tried at that time. But it was only when the Meiji came to power and it became necessary to have an effective force to quell internal disturbances and protect the nation from foreign threat. They wanted to make that type of national army for Japan, for internal disturbances also, for to protect the nation from foreign threat also. Next is tax on land and the pensions. How they had given pensions to the persons. The third major step in the creation of centralized political system was the institution of a land tax. Tax had been paid during the Tokugawa period in rice, and there were many local customs and practices. Moreover, land could not be sold. That is a very big achievement at that time. That was land could not be sold. The complex problem was debated in March 1872. The ban on sale of land was abolished. And after a period of intense debates, a land tax payable in cash was instituted in 1873. Land tax in cash. The tax was based on 4% of land's capital value. 4% of land's capital value. That was a tax. Means one fourth of production. Without going into details of manner in which this measure was carried out, the effect it had here, it needs to be noted that now the government had the basis for a stable source of revenue. Stable source of revenue. The important changes which these reforms reflect and which they brought about transformed the basis and nature of rule. The daimyo and upper samurai, as well as some court nobles. Daimyo, upper samurai, court nobles were deprived of power, though they still retain their economic clout. At the lower levels, many samurai merged with the peasantry. Many samurai people merged with peasantry. Others became landlords or merchants, and some joined the bureaucracy or the military forces. Next step they have taken towards the constitutionalism. The constitution was formulated in a context of debate and discussion within the ruling oligarchy and demonstrations, petitions from emerging political associations. The constitution was effected only after a host of other crucial political changes that were carried out. Examining the nature of the constitution, the process by which it was formulated, and the views of the opposition group indicates the nature and the character of authority in Meiji Japan. Now this is a turn to make the constitution in Japan. They wanted to formulate the law in context of debate and discussion, and with oligarchy, means the rulers which are on post, with demonstrations, with petitions from emerging political associations. Meiji Constitution. Japan has a long history of constitutions. The earliest is 17 article constitution issued by Shotoku Taishi in 604 AD. But idea of a modern constitution owes more to Western legal influence than to Chinese ideals. Before Meiji period, there had been deliberative assemblies of feudal lords, and there was a tradition of public authority or kogi, which there was a tradition of public authority or kogi, which many scholars see as on the basis on which modern constitutionalism was successfully built. The Meiji leaders in the initial months issued a statement which was in effect an appeal for unity and which laid down the basis for future change. The Charter Oath issued by Emperor on 6 April 1868 had 5 articles. The first among these promised an assembly widely convoked shall be decided by public discussion. This laid the basis for the creation of constitutional system of government. The crucial problems which arose while deciding about the nature of constitution were to do with the speed at which these measures would be carried out, the power authority of emperor. These laws would be integrated within Japanese traditional practices so that the society would not be disrupted. Protest, revolts against Meiji state, against dismantling of privileges. They wanted to dismantle the privileges to the samurai, to the shoguns. The more violent reactions were provoked by dismantle the structure of privileges of the traditional elite. The Shizuoku rebellions between 1874 and 1877 were serious challenges to the new regime. These revolts were led by young samurai who had been active in anti-Tokugawa movement and occupied important positions in new Meiji government. The elites found their traditional privileges taken away and were looking for an opportunity to assert themselves. They came together over the question of whether Japan should invade Korea or not. Korea had refused to open diplomatic and trade relations with Japan and Saigo. Saigo hoped to use this to build a samurai army. Satsuma played a crucial role because the samurai population there was very large. And in the rest of Japan, samurai had lived in castle towns throughout the Tokugawa period and had no direct connection with the land. Freedom and People Right Movement. The People's Right Movement also put forward a vision of Japanese politics, which was different from that supported by the Meiji leaders. Therefore, even though there are many features which are in common, and though some of the movement leaders compromised with the government, this differing basis marks of a clear divide. The movement also created political consciousness and contributed to the growth of political associations and political parties. Finally, the growth of movement within a decade of Meiji restoration points to the existence of local traditions of protest and solidarity. The movement had been growing particularly in the rural areas, and conventions were held demanding a constitutional government. To take an example, in March 1880, the Fourth General Convention of Association for the Establishment of a National Assembly was held with 114 delegates, representing 96,900 members, spread over 28 prefectures. After 1881, the People's Right Movement began to splinter, and according to some scholars, the violent incidents which took place between 1882 to 1885 form a separate phase which they call incidents of extremism. These incidents in Fukushima, Gumma, Kanagawa, Ibarakar, and Saitama were largely organized by leaders. These were the incidents organized by leaders from Kyoto to overthrow the oppressive government, which is the public enemy of freedom. The nature of Meiji political system. In political system, the very important thing we will discuss in this about the emperor and about the bureaucracy. The key feature in political system was emperor, who even though he did not exercise personal power, he became the source of power. And it's for this reason that many Japanese historians speak in an emperor system or describe the Meiji period as emperor system absolutism. It is important to remember that in Japanese, the word used for the emperor Tenno has a much more religious significance than the word emperor in English. In Japanese, the word used for emperor, Tenno, that is a much religious significance than the word emperor in English. The emperor had lived in relative obscurity throughout the Tokugawa period. He was dependent on Bakufu for finances. The emperor made 6 great circuits of the nation. These imperial progressions, in the word of Inou Karo, were carefully designed not only to inform the people of emperor's offers, the opportunity of displaying direct imperial rule in the flesh. That's why dispelling misgivings about monarchical government. The Meiji leaders were very consciously using the emperor for political ends, though at the same time his direct involvement was severely curtailed and he lived in the expressive phrase of the times above the clouds. The emperor was projected as an aloof and distant ruler who was above politics. He became, in the word of Mori Arinori, the peerless capital, the greatest possible treasure in the enterprise of fostering loyalty and patriotism. Goto Yasushi divides the development of emperor system into 3 periods. The first from 1868 to 1884 saw the formation of basic feature of the system. In second, 1885 to 1895, the system was implemented. The third, 1895 to 1905, there was a restructuring. The 2 pillars on which the system restored were the bureaucracy and the military. The 3 periods, they have divides the developments of emperor system. In first, basic features. In second, system was implemented. And third, restructuring. 2 pillars on which the system rested were bureaucracy and the military. Next and last is bureaucracy. The Meiji Emperor ruled till his death in 1912, and his reign marked the transition of Japan from a closed and isolated country to a major world power. Japanese institutions were radically transformed, and though hesitatingly, a constitutional structure was created. The parliament or diet, as it is called in Japan, was able to assert a small degree of authority and influence on ruling oligarchy. From these tentative and hesitant steps, a party system evolved and political debates increased. But right from the beginning, the Meiji leaders were able to seize the initiative and take decisions on the course of national policy. This was because they controlled and kept out the constitutional process, both the bureaucracy and the military. The key institutions and ministries functioned directly under the emperor. Ministries and the key institutions, they functions directly under the emperor. It is for this reason that even though in the subsequent periods there were changes, there were no violent social upheavals because different government institutions were jockeying for power. That's why in 1930s it was the army which became the dominant force within the government. Within the government. Now we are going to sum up our unit 4 and what we have done in unit 4, the political changes, the existing institutions, opposition movements, and now we want to recall this. The political changes in the Meiji period were carried out by a small group of leaders who had helped bring about Meiji restoration. They were motivated in part by the desire to transform Japan into a modern nation so that they could revise the unequal treaties. They were also interested in building a powerful and prosperous country. They used the existing institutions such as the imperial institution, religious ideas to effect slow and gradual change. The opposition movements also wanted to build a Japan, but their vision differed from that Meiji oligarchy. Anti-Meiji revolts by the traditional elite, Shizoku, were backward looking and arose out of loss of privileges and destruction of customary rights. These elites were thrown to market forces which they could neither understand nor control. In Unit 3, we have studied about the economic system of Japan, how they enhanced the economic development towards Japan. And in Unit 4, we have discussed about the political system. In political system, number 1 is emperorship and number 2 bureaucracy. We have studied these things in Unit 4. And now in our next classes, we will discuss about Unit 5 and Unit 6 of BHIE 142. Now, thank you. Have a nice day. We will meet in our next class. Thank you.